All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to another weekly live stream journaling session. Of course, I'm Eric Scott. And today I'm still working in that little pamphlet booklet that I stitched, I don't know how many months ago now. And I wanted to start using acrylic paint. And that's something I don't do a lot with journals, but with this little book, I just kind of feel like, well, first of all, it's all about experimenting. So I think that's kind of the big thing is that, trying things that maybe I'm not so comfortable with, things that I don't normally do. And so using acrylic paint really just seems like something I want to do with this little book. And the nice thing is that it's little. So, it's like I'm not tackling big, huge pages like in my everyday journal. So anyway, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. And if you want to pop into the comments and say hi, it's always awesome to see who's out there watching and where you're watching from. So anyway, let me go ahead and switch it over and I'll talk about kind of what kind of paints I'm going to use and kind of how I'm going to go about preparing my pages. So let's go ahead and flip this over. And so I have my little book. I haven't done anything to the covers yet. Maybe eventually I'll do something to the cover. So last time I glued in collage some images and then used some tracing paper. And I like the tracing paper and I like the translucency, and it gives it a bit of a hazy feel. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to use acrylic. I could use acrylic straight on the paper, but what I find is that even though this is mixed media paper, I used Strathmore 500 series mixed media paper. I find that sometimes the acrylics can soak in very quickly, and so I want to coat the surface. And this is where some people use gesso. Gesso is basically like a primer, and you can paint it on paper, wood, cardboard, canvas, and the gesso allows the paint to slide around more. It doesn't like soak in. Well, the thing is, if I use gesso's not completely opaque. I could probably paint it on and still see stuff through it, but it's going to cover up too much. And I want to really be able to control that. So instead of using a gesso, which is white, I'm going to use a matte medium. So this is going to dry totally clear. And this is golden matte medium. So I know it's going to be really matte. There's some brands out there that say it's matte medium and then you still paint it on, it's kind of shiny. You could use gloss medium if you wanted really shiny papers, but I find that the gloss medium can stick more than the matte medium. And so some folks have a problem when you use acrylic paint that your pages will want to stick together. And I find that with the golden materials, they don't do that so much. So I'm going to use the golden matte medium to kind of prepare pages, and then I'll paint on top of it. So anyway, so this is just the regular matte medium. And so usually what you do is you mix it in with paint, and that allows you to thin the paint and also kind of take some of the shine off of it. And I have a nice clean brush. Let me make sure it's nice and clean. And then I'm going to dry my brush. So I have some paper towels over here because I don't really want this watered down any. I mean, you can water it down, but typically we don't. So this stuff is pretty thick. There's also fluid medium, and that's a little bit thinner. Actually, just trying to think like if I should talk about the paint. So the paint I'm going to use two different kinds. I mean, they're both Golden brand. So Golden is one of the top names in acrylic paint. So it is a top premium acrylic paint. And I like their high flow acrylics. This stuff comes in bottles. It is the consistency of ink. And it's actually what I used for the red lines that was in a paint marker. And so it comes in these bottles. That's why I have a little palette over here is to hold it. So I have several colors of that. And then I also have the thick body acrylics. And again, some of the like similar colors to use. And so this is, so if I want the paint to be a little bit thicker, a little bit more opaque, I can use that. The liquid stuff tends to be more transparent, and so you can really see kind of the black through that. But like I said, I want to have the surface kind of smooth, or not smooth, but I want to paint over it with the matte medium, because that's just going to leave a clear, just going to seal in the paper. So when it goes on, it's kind of shiny just because it's wet. But when it dries, it's going to be very matte. It's not going to be shiny at all. And the nice thing is, because I have been using materials that are more permanent, so that those Inktense pencils, that Inktense paint by Derwent, that stuff dries pretty permanent, not completely permanent. And so it doesn't smear. So if you have regular watercolors underneath or water soluble markers, then you do have to be really careful with how you apply this. And I do want to let this dry. So I'm going to hit it with my hair dryer just to kind of speed up that process. Let me go ahead and mute it. And so, I mean, you can see that it's not super shiny. So it's pretty matte. It actually made the magazine a little bit less shiny, but it's just a nice little seal. And I do this a lot with standalone pieces. So often I will start off with a, using the watercolor and the water soluble pencil, and I will put the matte medium over top. So when you're looking at medium, there's all kind of medium. There's gel medium, there's matte medium, gloss medium. Because Golden makes fluid acrylics, which fluid acrylics are a little bit thicker than the high flow, and but more liquid than the tube paints. So they have a medium for that. They're fluid medium, so that's a little bit thinner. So this is going to leave brush strokes because it is thicker, but that's all right. I just want to make sure that I'm sealing in everything. And then again, hit it with the hair dryer. So using the hairdryer on the acrylic really can dry the surface. Sometimes it's still a little wet underneath the surface, but for our purposes today, this should be fine. So like I was saying, this is a process that I've used quite a bit in standalone art that's meant to be hung on the wall. It's not one that I've done a lot with my journaling, just because that big everyday journal, I mean, that goes with me everywhere. And, using acrylic paints in it can be, acrylics are more of a studio paint. I mean, because you're going to have to wash out the brushes when you're done. It can stain your clothes. It's really something that, like, you're not going to break out at a coffee shop or something like that. Whereas watercolor, I'll break out the watercolor whenever I'm traveling, and I take it with me. So that's one of the reasons I don't really do acrylic in my big journal, because it is more of a studio thing. I will sometimes use acrylic if I have it left over from like a painting. So anyway, let me go ahead and dry this. So I mean, it's sticking a little bit, just again because the medium isn't completely dry, and then also whenever I hit it with the hair dryer, the heat will soften it. So you know, but for today it should be fine. If I was doing this normally, I'd probably paint it with the matte medium and then let it dry naturally. But I do want to kind of get all of these 2-page spreads kind of taken care of. So the nice thing is that this ends up kind of sealing this center part where the pages meet, but it really ties in and covers up everything. Just gives it a nice clear coat. And then it's just going to allow the paint to slide around more. So when you're using acrylic directly on paper, like I was saying, it can sort of just soak right into the paper. And then it's hard to push it around and mix it and blend it. I mean, acrylic's kind of hard to do that anyway because it dries so fast. And you know, in the wintertime, when there's just so much less humidity, it kind of dries even quicker. All right, let's go ahead and dry it. Just realized that I was talking and had it muted from the last time that yeah, Jenny, I just realized that. So anyway, that's all right. I wasn't saying too much. So anyway, I'm going to mute it again and hopefully I'll remember to unmute. All right, remember to unmute at that time. So I'm done with the acrylics, because this was the last page that I wanted to, or the acrylic medium. I'm not done with the acrylics. So yeah, and so now I've got the sort of the front half of this book painted with the matte medium. Like I said, it's not, I mean, it does have a little bit of a sheen to it, but that's fine. And like I said, it's going to seal everything in. Now, if you do have an issue with your pages sticking, some folks put wax paper in between. Some folks I've heard like using a little bit of cornstarch and rubbing it on the surface after the paint dries. So there are all kind of ways that you can kind of keep it, because again, you know, this is a polymer, it's a liquid polymer, and sometimes it can stick. So anyway, let's go ahead. I want to use the high flow acrylics first, and I don't know if I'm going to use the heavier, thicker paints today. I mean, we'll see. So this stuff is liquid. You shake it up. There's a little ball in it. It's like a spray can. So this is probably one of my favorite colors. It is quinacridone nickel azo gold. And what I like about it is that it looks very brownish here. And so if you paint it on pretty thickly, it is pretty thick, it will be kind of brownish. But because of that gold, it's really interesting. And it's just one of my favorites. Now, a little bit of this goes a long way, so I don't really need much. And it's the consistency of ink. So again, it looks brown, but what I'm going to do, actually, you know what? I might want to thin it out, and I don't like to use water. I like to use some of this matte medium. So I'm going to scoop out a little bit, stick it in one of these empty spots. So that way I can play around with the transparency of the paint, even though it's not the same thickness. So the matte medium is much thicker than the high flow. You can still do some interesting things. I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush just to give me a little bit more control. All right, so when I put that on, see, it's kind of brown, but then when I start to scrub it out, it's got this really kind of golden, warm tint to it that I really like. And so I'm picking up a little bit of that matte medium, and that's just allowing me to spread it out and thin it out. So it's a little bit more transparent and a little bit lighter in value. So this color is really good to kind of warm things up. So, that's a little bit dark there. Add a little bit of that matte medium, and it thins it down. So it's kind of where, especially when I'm thinning it down, it really has this nice kind of golden color. Maybe a little bit more paint to make it a little bit darker up here. So really what I've done is tinted this whole page using that azo gold. Again, the whole name is the quinacridone nickel azo gold. That's a bit of a mouthful. So yeah, so I could dry that, but I think I'd be okay. I'm going to turn to this. I'm going to do the same thing. So again, if I want a little bit darker, add more of the liquid. As I spread it out, it's going to thin out. Use some of that medium. So if you've tuned in, you know that I'm all about layers. And so the same thing with the acrylics. I'm really about just layering up and slowly building things instead of just diving in with super opaque colors and things. That's why I like this azo gold. It's really transparent. But I mean, it just really brings a warmth to it. I find that the Inktense paints, they kind of get washed out whenever they dry. So that notion of washing out just basically means that it gets a little bit lighter. And that's the thing with a lot of watercolor paints, is that as they dry, they kind of lose a little bit of their brightness. They just kind of lighten up a little bit. And the Inktense paints and pencils are like that. You can get some paints that aren't quite as bad, but watercolor and water-based paints like that tend to do that. I'm not really sure why. I think it's the wetness, the water in it just really makes things look darker, and then it dries and it's like, oh no, it looks a little bit lighter now. But with the acrylic, I mean, this really is going to dry like this, and it's not really going to get any lighter as it dries. But you know, again, it just gives it this really nice warm tint. Maybe I go ahead and just thinking like, maybe I just do one more and go back to the beginning. So if I wanted to, I could really use this azo gold really straight, but I like to thin it down just to give some different intensities of it. Now, some of this tracing paper has wrinkled a little bit. So when I painted on the matte medium at first, it has water in it. And so sometimes the tracing paper can wrinkle, but that's part of the fun. I just love how that really transforms that whole page. Let's go ahead and rinse out the brush. You know, I'm just looking, I still have some of that left. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do this. As a little bit goes a long way, especially whenever I'm mixing it with that matte medium. So this is a great way of creating a glaze. So if you're not too familiar with acrylic painting techniques, a lot of times if you want to change the color of something, instead of really mixing up thick paint and then repainting over it, you can mix up a glaze. And a glaze is just a really thin layer of paint. And a lot of times we're using the matte medium or gloss medium or whatever kind of medium. Sometimes people will use water, but the reason I don't use water is that water can break down the acrylic and you can get it too thin, and then the pigment has a hard time sticking to whatever's underneath it. The water kind of breaks down the polymer that's in it. So if you get it too thin with water, so if I use medium, I know that that's pure acrylic polymer, so it's going to work really well to create that glaze. And I mean, this is just a perfect example of the glaze, is that, you know, to go from something that has this tone, lots of very light, but kind of cool. I mean, if you look at some of the browns, it's kind of a cool, and then, you know, this just really kind of a warm, very, very warm glaze over top, warm color over top. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. All right, so that's starting to feel pretty dry. I'm going to pull out white. Just a little bit. So I was saying earlier that, you know, some people will use gesso. And so you see that a lot. I think back to when altered books were really popular and people would gesso over top of the pages and leaving some of the print showing through. Some folks will take a blank journal, blank sketchbook or journal, and they'll paint gesso over the pages. That really kind of prepares the surface and thickens it up. But on here, the gesso would be too opaque, and I don't want something that's really opaque. I want to be able to control that. And so the liquid, the high flow white, is going to be somewhat opaque. It's kind of like, it's almost like the tracing paper. It's kind of translucent. And then if I want to fade it out, I pick up a little bit of that matte medium, and then I can fade it out. And so I'm you know, kind of giving it this kind of a cloudy effect. Again, just picking up a little bit. Like I said before, I could use water to thin it out. I really like using that medium. Now, sometimes the white can feel cool, especially next to this azo gold. So if I wanted to, I can mix in a little bit of that azo gold and give it a little bit of warmth. But we'll just kind of go with this and see. And so what I can do now is I can start to build up a little bit more white here, a little bit more down here. I'm just kind of doing little X's, little circles, just trying to blend that in. If I wanted to, maybe I could pull down and just do lines, do streaks. Kind of like that. So that white just kind of softens things. Again, makes it very translucent, kind of cloudy looking, kind of brings a little bit more mystery to it, like something's there, like you almost have to wipe it off, kind of looking at this and how clear things are underneath, and then going back to that, there's something interesting going on there. I'm trying not to cover up the boy's face too much there. I'm just kind of wondering, I'm like, do I want to do any kind of other marks? So I'm just getting a thinner brush. I'm like, do I want to have some lines? So the thing is, with this paint on this brush, it's a little bit more opaque because I'm putting down a little bit more of the paint. And it's like, oh, I don't know if I like that. So before it dries, just take my other brush, and it's another reason why having that matte medium down, it seals the surface, lets the paint sit on top, and then you can kind of decide, like, oh, I don't like that too much, I can wipe it off or fix it. So we'll come back to that. Let's go ahead and go to this one. And again, I can put it on pretty thick and it's going to be pretty opaque. Maybe down here I want it to be more opaque. Mix in some of that matte medium. So I'm kind of like, the brush will run out of paint and then I can drag it over areas, and it's a technique called dry brushing, because the brush is pretty dry, doesn't have a lot of paint in it. So it's hitting some of the textures from the brush strokes or from the wrinkled tracing paper, kind of doing some interesting things. Might not be easy to see that. But just kind of interesting to build up some of that. Okay. So I've kind of run out of the paint and the matte medium here, and I think that's actually a good space to kind of stop and sort of just kind of, let's look it over Yeah, some of these pages are still pretty damp. Again, when I hit it with the hair dryer, it dried the surface, but then I did paint over it with that azo gold, and um, so this is kind of what it was before. I mean, it does have a layer of that matte medium, and then I painted with the azo gold and some matte medium, and just really glazed over it and tinted the whole thing. And then a little bit of the white. And again, I was just using the, let me pull out one I've actually used. So the golden high flow paints. And I mean, you can get the same effect with regular acrylic paint and the matte medium. You just need a little bit of the thicker acrylic paint. And it doesn't quite flow like the high flow. But, so this is kind of like really taken on a different feeling now. And so it's really kind of obscuring some of the things that were in the background. And so as I work later, I might pull out some of those. I mean, I did put that red line that went through, and that's gotten really obscured now. That might come back, or maybe I'll add a different one. Some of these things, like I could see this circle coming back out. Maybe I paint that and have that kind of pop out. But we'll see. Like I'll probably, next week I'll continue adding, the azo gold here. So I'm probably going to kind of just work to this spread, and then, because I haven't really done anything to this last half of this. And so this is the halfway mark. I probably won't do anything to this until I get this side done, but yeah, really no idea what's going to come next, but really liking the layering with the acrylics. And I love the pages have just gotten much thicker, feel very plastic-like. So just a totally different feel to the book now. All right, so that's going to kind of wrap it up for today. Just really playing around with the acrylics, experimenting, trying some different things, and using these high flow acrylics can really help. I mean, they're transparent, so it's really great to build up layers. It's one of the reasons I like them. I've used the water-based, the watercolor and the Inktense pencils and such for the longest time, and I love the transparency of them. But with acrylics, a lot of times you don't have that transparency. The high flow, because it's so liquid, is just pretty automatic that it's going to be fairly transparent. Not all of them are. I mean, the darker the color is, the more opaque it is. But some of them are very transparent, and they do sell some like ones that are transparent. I mean, that's what they're called. Like I can't think of anything, but if you go on the Golden website, it is Golden brand, so they are expensive, but they're top quality. Other brands have very similar things. So, with the fluid, and a lot of people do pouring and such. So thinning it down with a thinner matte medium or pouring medium might work to really make it a more fluid kind of thing. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the live stream today. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, pop them into the comments below, whether here on Facebook or on YouTube, and I'll try to respond to them. But anyway, I appreciate those of you that have tuned in, and appreciate your time, and appreciate you being here, and let me know if you need anything. And so anyway, thank you so much. And as always, happy creating.